Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Executive Scrutiny Board meeting, Tuesday the 15th of February. Do you want any apologies, please?
Chair, I have apologies from Councillor Patterson.
Councillor Patterson. OK, no other apologies. We'll move on to later items to be introduced by the Chair. I have none. Any declarations of interest, please? If there aren't any, we'll move on to item 4 minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of January and the 17th of January. I think you've all had those attached. Move the Chair. Thank you, Lucy. Forward plan item 5, you've also had copies of that, I understand. There's nothing that you wish to comment about that. Item 6, Council Cabinet response to scrutiny recommendations. Again, you'll have also had copies of that. Followed by item 7, the performance plan, 2021-22.
Okay, thank you, Chair. The report talks about our plan to bring items to the Executive Scrutiny Board in February, March and April before the change in municipal year, and some indication of ones in the new municipal year. So tonight on your agenda you've got the Q3 performance report as part of the Cabinet report, and you can consider that tonight. In March, it's our intention to bring a presentation on the Intelligence-Led Council and Working Smarter programme, and then in April, a presentation on climate change. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Just brief headlines on this. This is a regular report that normally comes around this time of the year in relation to determining admissions arrangements for council-maintained schools. All of this is in line with the admissions code, very similar to all authorities, if not identical. Most of that's governed through legislation. So, Chair, in terms of consultation has taken place, no significant changes, if any, to the actual admissions criteria itself. The admissions document is set out and the criteria admissions is set out and is comparable to the code itself, and then the recommendations are set out there, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Gamal. Any comments or observations? Lucy, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is a report that we get every year, and there are usually very few changes, as I believe is the situation this year as well. However, I'm aware that the number of people who are contacting me over the last few years has been going up in terms of trying to get children into often their local school. Is particularly related to admissions partway through the year, but it can also be admissions at the beginning of the school year. We sometimes see national data on the number of parents who have got their first/second preference school, outcomes from appeals and things like this. And I don't remember having a report with this sort of information in it recently. I'm particularly interested to know about the levels of waiting lists for different schools and different year groups, and what the outcomes of appeals are. And I just wondered if that was information that was gathered and easily available, or whether it's something that other members would be interested in and we should maybe request a report or ask CYP to ask them to receive a report on it, which I could then, of course, read.
Thank you, Lucy. Gamal, can you help us with it?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Absolutely. So that information is available, and Chair, if you're comfortable, those reports and comparable data is available. If I arrange circulation to this group, and then decisions can be taken in terms of if you want a focused discussion and report on that, very happy to do that. That data is comparable to authorities, so very happy to share that.
Thank you very much, Gamal. That's really useful.
Lovely, Chair. Can I just ask whether it's available school by school, is that data?
Gamal, is it available school by school or is it collective?
Chair, I'm not sure. I think it's more at a collective level in terms of data and stats the Department for Education produces that we have as well on preferences received, first preferences, second preferences, and comparable data. Maybe if I share that firstly, Chair, that may give an idea around that information. At a school level, without going into too much detail, there are much more variabilities around who's applied, where do they live, and what was their preference in relation to the three preferences.
Yeah, I guess Gamal can only share what there is, but I understand, I think, what you're driving at, Lucy, that it may not satisfy what ideally you and perhaps others of us would like to see, where breaking down school by school. So let's see what Gamal has actually got, how detailed it is, and then we'll ask questions from there. Are you okay with that, Lucy?
I think that's okay as a starting point, but from the point of view of us knowing whether our admission system is working well, I think we do need to know it school by school, and preferably within some sort of geographic area. And I think that'll give us an idea of whether we are working a system as effectively as possible for the young people and the parents of the city.
Okay, I guess we won't know until we look, and then we can see what deficiencies there are and what work we need to do, if we can, to actually fill those deficiencies. But thank you very much for that. Okay, if there's no other... thank you very much, Gamal, for that. Item 9, we're on to adult social care fees and charges. Kirsty, over to you. Thank you.
Evening, everybody. Would you like me to go through the report in detail or summary?
Possibly in summary, and then we can ask members if they've got any queries or comments after that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. So yes, this report is looking at two areas really. So it's fees and charges. The report is an annual report that we bring to Cabinet. If I start with the fees, as you'll be familiar with, we have to, as a council, make sure that we are taking account of some of the pressures in the social care market when we determine what we'll be able to pay for care packages that we're arranging on behalf of vulnerable people. And so this report is giving you quite a lot of detail about the process by which we this year have come up with our proposed fee rates. So if I just talk you through the recommendations, what we're looking for in relation to fees will be an approval to increase the fees for residential and nursing care by 4.6.9% from April, start of the new financial year. And for home care, we'll want to increase that for 3.7%. Now, the report gives the details in the appendices as to how we've reached that percentage. And in both cases, we look at a range of different elements that would contribute towards the fees that we'd be able to pay to private care providers. But we also take on board consultation and any feedback that they tell us in relation to their inflationary pressures and their cost pressures. And the biggest one for both of these relates to the rise in minimum wage, because a lot of what the contribution of the fee is for staff salaries, really. So in the detail of the report, and you'll see it also in the appendices, you can see that those are the areas that have had a greater inflationary uplift. And that's what leads us to the composite percentage that we'll be recommending to Cabinet tomorrow. And then talking you through the other recommendations then, like I said, it was also about the charges that the council makes, and that's because the council also in the administration of social care makes some charges for services it provides. Some of them are administrative services, but we do have a couple of services that we provide ourselves that we charge for, and we're proposing that we would increase the amount that we charge by 3%, which is lower than what we're proposing for private sector. But that's because at the time, certainly, of writing this report, this was the amount that the council is generally allowing for inflationary pressures across a range of services. So we normally try and make sure that we're in line with other council service fees that might be increasing. The only one that we're proposing to make an exception for is for the fees in relation to the shared lives carer service. And this is because that is directly providing care, and obviously the care costs associated with that will be similar to those in the wider home care service. So actually we're proposing to increase those by 3.7%, which is the same as in recommendation 2.2. Another recommendation which also matches the home care, I'm sure many members of the board will be aware that some individuals, rather than us arranging their care, they draw down what we call a direct payment and they use the money to organise the care themselves. It is predominantly paying for staff costs as you would expect. And so again, we want to be able to, if we're requested, to increase those fees by up to 3.7%. And the reason that this won't be an automatic uplift is that our relationship is with the individual, not with the care provider, because they take the cash payment and organise that themselves. And it's not always the case that the care provider may actually be increasing their charge to the individual. So there's no point in us making that assumption. So this will just give us the ability, if we are asked by an individual, to be able to increase the payment. And then the last couple of recommendations, one is about the effective date, which we're expecting to be the 11th of April, which would match the date that the general rise in welfare benefits takes place this year. And then we also have some other contracts for services that are for more complex individuals that don't lend themselves to this kind of modelling approach. So actually we negotiate those on a case-by-case basis. And what we have asked for, or what we'll be asking Cabinet for, is to delegate authority to the Strategic Director and the Cabinet member so that we can agree those as and when those requests come through. There's a lot less of those, but like I say, they have to really be relevant to the individual circumstances. They don't merit an overall approach. That's probably all I'll say, and maybe take some questions. I know there's a lot of detail in the main report.
Thank you, Kirsty. Alison, I think you wish to come in.
Yes, thank you, Kirsty. I'm sure you are very aware that we are in the midst of a cost of living crisis, and therefore I'm sure you will be very minded to look at the impact of this on those who have to pay, and also will be very minded to ensure that those who do not have to pay, or well, that most of the people get the help they need in paying these increases. However, I do understand that there is an inflationary increase in costs. I'm a bit intrigued by the fact that for some external bodies, the inflationary increase is levelled at 4.69%. But the Council's assumption about inflationary pressures is only running at 3%. So does that suggest to us that that discrepancy, what does it suggest to us? I mean, does it suggest that the Council's assumptions about inflationary pressures are a little below where they should be? Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Simon, do you want to come back, or Kirsty?
Yes, no, I was delighted to see that the Strategic Director can answer that.
Yeah. Right, thank you.
Thank you. Inflation is a complex issue because every sector, every service, every commission service will have a different inflationary mix. And we have a choice as a council, obviously, to decide whether we provide inflation across all expenditure items, or whether we don't and ask services to manage. What this report does is to detail some of those inflationary pressures in the sector. So, for example, the national living wage has impacted on the sector, as has VNI and social care levy and everything else. So we have to recognise this is an assessment, and it's an assessment at a point in time of the inflationary pressures. But we know that the Care Association and care providers are making representations nationally about inflation in the sector, and we're not immune to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Lucy.
I think I'm coming to this one from a slightly different angle, in that there's an assumption here that the hourly private sector charge for a visit, cost for a visit, is around £17. But if you go to the private sector, the charge you're likely to be expected to pay is around £25. And that suggests to me that the challenge that any company providing services that we are paying for is to actually maintain staff. And we know from other comments and within the report that there is a real challenge of actually maintaining staffing, and there's mention of the amount of agency staff who are obviously more expensive that is needing to be pulled in to continue to provide the important care services. Now, with that sort of assessment of where we are, I'm just wondering, are we able to work more closely with the community to actually meet some of the needs of some of the people who are receiving care? And that may be paid for by themselves, or it may be paid for by us. I'm thinking some of the work that the LACs are doing, which we get a report on later in the meeting. That sort of coordination and support, I think that if that is applied early enough, then we can actually help support people and provide support for people through that sort of work. And are we engaging as much as we can on that agenda? Because for every time we don't need somebody to go in to provide support for an individual, it frees up that person's time to meet somebody else's needs who is in greater need of support. So that's my first point as to whether there's anything more we can be doing to reduce the demand on the service in the long term, and that awareness that it's really challenging at the moment in terms of the staffing. My second comment is on the survey, and I was disappointed at the level of responses that we got from people who are in that sector, and we are consulting. And maybe I shouldn't be, because that consultation level was phenomenally higher than some of the consultations that we do with the general public. But looking at the survey itself and the detail within it, there were an enormous number of answers that were required to be entered. And I can see that if you're filling in this form, you've not got a lot of time, and somebody says, well, how much money are you spending on food? I don't know how much money I'm spending on food, but it's really important I tell you this message later on. And therefore, the information that we're picking up on the cost of a particular element that somebody needs to look up and find out about, we may actually be either encouraging them to put in anything so that they can get to the end of the survey and provide us with a piece of nugget of stuff that they really want us to hear, or they might not bother to do it at all because it's just too difficult to get the answers right. So I want to challenge the department to say, are we actually wanting to communicate with people, or are we wanting to do an analytical assessment? And if it's somewhere in between, which I think it probably is, we need to stop requiring every question to be answered.
Yeah, I think I can remember going back a few years, Lucy, and I'm sure you can. I had a document called Your Life, Your Choice, which talked about resilient communities in terms of building up the capacity to support people wherever possible, wherever safe, in their own homes. And that's using both the paid sector and also the strengths of the individual and that individual community. But I'll let Kirsty expand on that with regard to your first question and your second points as well.
Yeah.
Kirsty.
Thanks. I mean, I think in answer to your question, which is initially, what are we doing to manage demand? Absolutely, as Councillor Repton's just been describing, Derby is pretty well advanced compared to some other councils in understanding what we describe as that strength-based or asset-based approach. And obviously, Councillors Care's already referenced the local area coordinators. And I would say in the past year, we've probably accelerated how we are working with communities, partly because as a result of the pandemic, there's been a lot of opportunities for communities to come together and the voluntary sector to work with us. But also because we are seeing, and it's been well rehearsed nationally, a crisis in the sense of the care workforce. We are absolutely reliant on only giving out care to those who really need it. So I would say at the moment, if you were talking to any social worker out there, more and more they are trying their best to work to kind of either divert people or to tap into community alternatives, the voluntary sector. Absolutely, we are so reliant on the local area coordinators and also family carers themselves. So I would say we're probably strengthening what we're doing around demand management, partly in response to the crisis, but also because we have been building up, I suppose you'd call it a movement around trying to harness what people can do for themselves. So, I mean, I think you mentioned there's going to be a report on the local area coordinators, but I would say that strand of managing demand for a range of council services is something that will heavily feature in the next coming years. I think, you know, and other local authorities will be playing catch up, if I'm honest. And then on the actual survey, it is a balance, because we want to encourage sufficient detail that we feel that we understand what providers are grappling with. And if we make it too light touch, then we might be accused of not going into sufficient detail. I think what I would probably say is that the survey is one thing, we're not just relying on that. So we do have ongoing discussions with providers throughout the years, and, you know, they tell us the problems that they're struggling with. We also have had some, particularly some of the larger organisations, write letters to us. They're kind of round robins that go to all local authorities, but often they'd set out what their cost pressures are. And then we also ourselves have a little bit of intelligence, because we do have a couple of in-house services that we can, you know, look and see what the costs are. But one thing that will be quite interesting for the board to note is that as part of the social care white paper, the government is going to require, I think it's in this coming financial year, all local authorities to conduct what they're calling a fair cost of care exercise. And if anyone's interested in it, I can send you the latest guidance on that. So all local authorities will be required to do a really deep dive into the cost of care in their local market, and that will include us as well. So yes, like I say, it is a balance to not ask too much detail to the point where you turn people off, but we also need some detail. But certainly there will be a requirement to do quite a detailed exercise this coming financial year. And I think, you know, we're always looking for ways to try and engage with providers, because, you know, they are incredibly busy, and Councillor Kerr's right. You know, it's an open book accounting almost exercise that we're interested in, and some engage with it better than others. But anything that we can do, and any suggestions about, you know, improving that, we'll definitely take on board.
Thank you very much, Kirsty. Okay.
Through your chair, it might be something that you could ask some of the people who haven't responded, or a few of those who have, and see if it would have made a difference.
Yeah, no, it's a good idea.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Moving on to item 10. This is with regard to the sale of Unit 3, Westside Park, Belmore Way, Rainsway, Derby. Is it Steve? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm happy to present this paper drafted by one of my colleagues, Joanna Rees, Senior Valuer in my team. There are two elements to this paper this evening. There is a restricted paper where there is commercially sensitive information. So this section, I will just give you the recommendations as printed and a little bit of background to this paper, which is obviously delivering an outcome of a disposal of a property if so deemed by the Cabinet. So the property is, as you said, 3 Westside Park. It was acquired through part of an economic regeneration growth fund some years ago. The previous occupiers have been into administration and now liquidation, and it is now re-let, the details of which are in the second part of the paper. The proposal is this property is not a strategic asset, it is not held to deliver a service, and the income details, which again are set out in the second part of the paper later on under item 19, are clearly set out there, which sets out the business case, if you like, behind the recommendation. The recommendation being to declare the property surplus to the Council's requirements, to delegate authority to the Strategic Director and working in collaboration with the Cabinet member to agree a sale of the property, and then the capital receipt will go into the general fund, and any balance due under the DEGF will also be dealt with through finance and colleagues. And again, the details of that are commercially sensitive. The specifics of the property are set out in terms of its size. I'm sure some colleagues and members are familiar with the asset. I can take questions on this section, but I suspect there might be more questions in the second section in the evening, if that's all right, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Lucy.
Notwithstanding the various reasons given in paragraph 4.3 about why to sell the property, I'm just conscious that in terms of return on investment, this is actually delivering significantly more than if we have that as a lump sum, because inflation in interest rates are so low at the moment and we are so cautious in our investments. Now, this is something that we already have, and yes, as it states here, there is a risk that the current person who is paying us rental on it could go out of business and we could no longer have any payment, and that would probably reduce its value as a capital asset, because whoever buys it would also be cognizant of the fact that it's earning money at the moment. But when we are so short of revenue and there seems to be not a lot of risk and it's quite a nice earner, why do we want to get rid of it now? What is apart from it being the market being buoyant at the moment, it might continue to be buoyant, may be worth even more next year. So why now?
Okay, Steve, thank you.
Chair, with due respect, if I can answer those questions in the second part, because they do refer to commercially sensitive numbers, and I'm very happy to elaborate on that, but the numbers explain the story as to why now. So with your permission, I'd like to answer those in the second part of the agenda, if that's all right, Chair.
I think we understand. Okay.
Chair, I looked at the numbers and I just wanted to know if there was a generality of comment that you could give and maybe go into it in more detail.
I mean, I don't want to put words in the officer's mouth, but I guess it will demonstrate under the pink papers why he feels it's better value for money to do it at that time.
I'm just conscious, Chair, that there may be people listening to this meeting who would appreciate an idea as to why. But if there's nothing more you can say than there is in the papers, then...
Are you able in very, very general terms to...
In very general terms, Chair, yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I would say that this particular sector of the commercial property market is very, very sought after at this moment in time. That means the freehold prices are arguably the highest I've ever seen in my working life for this type of property. So there is an interesting opportunity to realise what may be a high point. I'm not saying the highest, I'm not professing to call a market, but I've never seen commercial warehouses perform at this low yield. The lower the yield, the higher the value. The numbers do explain why at this moment in time the finances support the recommendation, is what I would say in this part of the meeting, Chair. Thank you.
I think we understand. Thank you very much for that. Okay. Item 11, Market Hall transformation. Simon, is that you?
It is, Chair. If I just find the paper. I've got a few too many papers open. So, thank you, Chair. Members will recall that the refurbishment and transformation of the Market Hall was commenced a number of years ago, and in November 2020 we brought a report about what it would cost to bring phase 1 to fruition, which is effectively the renovation of the structure of the Market Hall, including, as you can see, the copper roof, the lantern, brickwork and metalwork and everything else. And members agreed back in November 2020 a budget of 14.257 million to carry out the phase 1 work, and it's pleasing to tell you that that is both on time for delivery as planned and also within the budget that was set. At that time, it was also agreed that we would undertake design work in respect to phase 2, which is the transformational element, the services and everything else, floor, etc. of a market hall, and that members agreed to put aside 1.621 million towards the phase 2 design. At that point, we also indicated to members that we were bidding for Future High Streets Fund to help us with the transformation of a market hall, and we reported after that we had actually secured 9.430 million of Future High Streets funding towards, as part of a 15 million grant announcement to Derby. And in that report it said that we would be bringing back to a future cabinet following confirmation of a Future High Streets Fund and final details of phase 2, another report. So this is the report which is follows on from that recommendation. Just maybe to help give some of the context, what you see in front of you is a covering report and also a business plan, operating plan for the market hall. The business plan details effectively partly why we are undertaking the market hall in terms of its objectives, and these were set down previously by Cabinet or as part of a Future High Streets Fund bid around commercial viability, a key destination, entrepreneurial space, alignment to the city centre ecosystem. And in the business plan, it gives more details effectively of the outcomes and outputs that we expected as part of that. This is not a replacement of the market that was there. It's trying to create a different market, including an increased food and beverage offer, cultural sort of activity in there, creative activity. If I can use the expression, encouraging people to use it as a destination and to dwell in Derby Market Hall, which I think most members will appreciate is a beautiful building at the heart of the city, and we need to celebrate that heritage asset. Just in terms of then what is being requested here, it is for a additional capital approval in order to bring this forward. The report details, and again in the both in this main report and in the exempt appendix, what that is, and it also talks about the level of contingencies that are within the amounts that we have stated, because we've done design work up to what is called in the architectural standard REBA stage 2, but it's actually beyond that in terms of the design, in terms of the costed supply chain estimates and everything else. It does include 20% client contingency, and that obviously will reflect things that we will not know at this stage of design, but also provides for some of what could be potential increase in supply chain costs. As we know, construction and other costs are going up. The report also asks you to consider progressing work in respect of the public realm, especially around the Osborne Square end, and to move to the next stage of design on that. In the Cabinet last month, you approved some money for the connecting works, especially through the Guildhall entrance, and it also then asks for us to progress options for the future use of the lock-up yard and obviously that area. So this is, I think, a transformational offer in respect of Derby Market Hall. Most of the money inevitably in a heritage building is going about making it fit for the next 30 years and fit for the 21st century. But it's also, and hopefully the visuals help to capture some of it, transforming both that visibility for the city, but also the attractiveness of the internals. So, for example, we intend to glaze some of the Osborne Square end, which currently is fairly brick heavy in terms of that visibility into the market hall, drawing people in as part of our connecting the city. So there's lots of detail in the report and the operating model. The operating model also talks about that we hope by year 4 to be reaching a position where it does not require subsidy from the council. We think we're being prudent and in respect of that estimate, but in restoring a heritage building, you are never going to get a return on investment that covers both the refurbishment costs and the market or operating costs. And I just ask you to consider that as one of the council's key buildings in the city, we had to invest, and members have previously agreed to invest in the heritage asset to bring it into future use for 30 years. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Simon. I'll make a few comments before I bring others in. Just like the costly debacle over the assembly rooms where we had delay and indecision, followed by the extremely costly abandonment of this administration's plans to refurbish, we now have the continuing saga of the Market Hall refurbishment. We were told at the November Cabinet meeting by Councillor Barker that the estimated cost at that time would be final. Yet less than 3 months on, we're now told that the latest costs are going to be an additional staggering £10 million, taking the costs of the total to an eye-watering £35 million. If these budgets had been better kept under control, we could have had the money to comply with the motion passed at the last full council meeting to commit to and fund and build a centrally located swimming pool to replace the Queen's Pool if this administration went ahead with its plans to close it. I will be making a recommendation at the end of this, but I will take other members' views on this. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Councillor Repton. Yeah, the situation here is quite staggering, really. You know, when you look at the difference between the time difference between November and now, being told in November that the cost wouldn't exceed 25 million, and now we're being asked to approve, or the Council Cabinet will be asked to approve another £10 million, and this is surely an overspend on the amount that was planned in November. So I think all in all, it looks like a project that's somewhat out of control. And what I would ask, Simon, if you may, I mean, what's he envisaging will happen in another 3 months' time? Does he think that some more millions will be required for this project? Thank you.
This project, if I referred in my opening presentation to the Cabinet report in November 2020, which made it clear of what was allocated by members to phase one, and I talked about it being that 14.257 million plus 1.621 million for phase two design, so a budget of 15.878 million. That noted that a future report would be brought to this Cabinet following confirmation of Future High Streets Fund, for what's previously reported, and the final detail of phase two. As the senior responsible officer for this, I am bringing you the details, both here and in the confidential appendix, of the makeup of phase two, which includes a series of items, for example, the mechanical and electrical engineering, the screeding of the floor, the refurbishment of the stalls, the moving of the staircase and everything else. We have done a very rigorous exercise of trying to establish, along with weights at this stage of design, the potential cost, and we have also provided for contingency. So I don't think that we'll be coming back asking for a further allocation, because this is a proper assessment of the refurbishment required to deliver phase two, and this follows on from that Cabinet recommendation approved in November 2020, and this report is trying to give you a very clear and actually a very detailed report, both here and in the confidential appendix, not only of the capital costs but the operating costs of this market. So I do not see it as an overspend. I see this as a quantification of the need to bring that building back into use following the previous Cabinet recommendation of 2020. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Well, first let me say, from what I can read in the papers about the process, it's the project itself, I thoroughly approve of what is happening to the Market Hall, because it is a gem in the centre of our city and so on. But to pick up Councillor Martin's point, it does seem a bit as if this project is a bit out of control, and following the debacle over the A52, they set up a major projects board to stop this sort of thing happening, and yet now we're seeing another cost overrun. And I'll just pick up some items in here. I hear what Simon just said about they don't expect to come back, but in the risk register it talks about asbestos, and it's impossible to fully establish end costs until the further survey. So we don't know where some of these costs could go. And in the end, it says it includes some challenging income targets in order to minimise future maintenance costs and look after the revenue. So I do think we need to be concerned, is what I'm saying, Chair.
You make some important points, Mike. Lucy?
Yeah, thank you. And again, I agree this is an iconic building for Derby. It's not incredibly unique, which is why it isn't Grade 1 listed, but it is an important building and it's important that it can be in use. But the structural costs, I think we accept. And we've got the building in the phase 1, we've got it safeguarded, we've got it secure, we've got it ready for the future. And we're now looking at what goes on inside it. And I just wonder how much this has been given, the consultants have been given an open opportunity to say, right, what do you want to do here? Give us your designs, as if this budget isn't an option. And how much they've said, well, actually, we know how tight finance is at the moment. We'd like to do as much as possible, as effectively as possible, but we don't want it to cost too much. Because I feel that at the moment, we are probably in that stage. And quite frankly, the visuals, the very attractive visuals that we've been given, by themselves don't seem to be worth £10 million. It isn't that different. It's lovely and open and airy, and it would be nice. But we can't see the other structural or the services elements of things that are happening there. There's a comment that we're not going to have a natural gas supply. There's an implication that we have PVs on the roof. I don't know where they are. I don't know if they've actually happened. But it has got a glazed ceiling, which maybe it's double glazed now. I don't know whether it is or not. Maybe there's still insulation to go in, which isn't structural, but is part of the next phase. There is potential, maybe it's heat source units, air source heat units that we can see in one of the pictures, but I can't see £10 million of additional work. And just some more information about that, I think would be nice. We do need to do something. It needs to be functional. It needs to be able to move forward. But are we putting too much icing on the cake?
Right, I think Simon wants to come back on that. Simon?
First of all, in response to Councillor Carr's comment, in the exempt part of the agenda, it talks about a series of costed risk items, which I think addresses issues like what we've provided for asbestos and other aspects. In respect of some of the other areas, obviously in terms of a business plan, we've made assumptions about occupancy and the nature of the type of rents that we will charge, turnover rents for those which will benefit, plus fixed rents and casual rents for the rest of it. This proposal does translate it from being a service or an asset which required a subsidy to one that should deliver a surplus, and we think that's a prudent surplus by year 4. It also includes some upfront in year 1, i.e. before the market opens, to make sure that we get the right trader mix, the right attraction, the right planning through a market manager to make this asset successful and vibrant. We would hope from the opening, not 4 years down the line, so we may accelerate past that. In respect to Councillor Kerr's observations, this is an asset where, for example, putting in mechanical and electrical services fit for the next 30 years. In terms of removing the plinths, screeding the floor, moving the staircase, making the balcony secure and everything else. This is not a bells and whistles refurbishment. It is the cost of bringing this asset into the 21st century. It creates 67 units. The report talks about 67 units. It talks about the layout, the opening hours, and a bit of a trader mix. Maybe to give an example, on the first floor, you've got a number of units on the first floor that will be basic shell and fit out for creative units. But most of this money, if we've got to be absolutely frank, is creating a building that operates with modern facilities, not glossy facilities, plumbing, electric, and other services that are required in the building. There is an element where we're trying to improve the attraction and the destination, for example, like the glazing on the Osbrook Square end, and in terms of a potential change in use of the poultry market, both the ground and the first floor. So I can assure Councillor Kerr that this is a project that has looked at every aspect to see that the investment we're getting is both making that change in terms of how the market will operate, and also that we've sought that value for money test, if you want to call it, in respect of this. Probably finally, this is not a heated market building. It's not going to be a heated market building. The louver on top of the roof is to allow ventilation as well, so you can open it and shut it. So again, if we were being grandiose in here, we would have said, well, should we create a heated market hall? No, it's such a big building that a lot of the functionality and everything else that was there previously, we haven't, in a sense, had the money, if I've got to be absolutely frank, to build on that. So I think it will transform people's experience in why they'd want to dwell there, eat there, engage in a creative activity. But most of the money is to create the market hall. It's a 30 million, effectively, investment in transforming that market hall into one that we think will last at least 30 years with what we are putting into it now. Thank you, Chair.
I will take legal advice on this because I want to make reference, without reference to the figures, about some of the comments in the pink pages about where there's a lot of ifs, maybes and buts, and about certain things haven't been determined yet and a feasibility study is required, etc. And against this, and I won't quote the figure because of obvious reasons, but these are the areas where we're talking about substantial amounts of money. And I think where there's a bit of unease, where we want clarification. So we will be able to have greater discussion in the closed part of this meeting to that. But I think Lucy does raise some important questions. I know Councillor Martin wants to come back with another question.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to respond to that because, yes, I love the market. It's always been very dear to my heart. I really like going to markets, and like everybody else probably here, we wanted to see that market improve, and we welcome the investment. But I have to say that it's really perturbing that a £35 million project is not a bells and whistles project. I mean, that just makes it even more concerning. And I'm just wondering, whether there is really sound management of this project, or whether, because actually most of us know that if we're in a project, you can let the cost expand to the amount that you actually have available. And I'm just wondering if the focus has been so exclusively on this development that the dire need that we have for another centrally located, albeit smaller, pool in the city, that's just, people have lost sight of that and are just ploughing even more money into this project. Thank you.
I think on that basis, what I will do is make a recommendation now, and then it's up to members here if they agree or not. Executive Scrutiny recommends to Cabinet there is now an immediate and thorough re-examination of all the plans and costs for the Market Hall refurbishment, with the aim to make savings that can pay for a replacement centrally located pool in line with the motion that was passed at the last full council meeting. So basically asking Cabinet for an immediate and thorough re-examination of all the plans and costs for the Market Hall refurbishment with aim to make savings at the end of it as well. Okay, do I have a seconder for that? Mike, thank you very much. Anybody wish to speak, or do you wish to just go to the vote on that? Okay, those that indicate those in favour, please show. Those against, please show. Okay.
Chair, so that was 4 in favour and 1 against.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, well, we'll have further discussion in the pink parts of the meeting.
Chair, I was wanting to also look forward and to the point in the business plan, which we're given quite a lot of details on, but there doesn't seem to be a recommendation within the report as to how the business plan is going to be monitored. And yes, the aspiration is that it will be paying its way well in not too long, but it's got to get there. And I think that we need to make sure that it gets there. So I'd also like to put forward a recommendation to say that we recommend that Cabinet sets in place close and public monitoring of the business plan for the reopened Market Hall to maximise the likelihood of the reopening leading to a successful and profitable venture.
How will that fit in with the recommendation that's just been passed, Lucy?
It's a different one. It's a different recommendation on a different angle of the report.
Okay. Is there a seconder for that? Mike? Okay. Anybody wish to speak on Lucy's recommendation? Alison?
I recommend that Cabinet sets in place close and public monitoring of the business plan for the reopened Market Hall to maximise the likelihood of the reopening leading to a successful and profitable venture.
So perhaps Councillor Kerr just could elaborate very, very briefly how she sees what crucial difference she sees in her recommendation to the first one, please.
The first one is looking at prior to it being completed, whereas mine is looking at the assumption that it has been completed. No, mine won't come into play unless it is completed. But however the Market Hall is reopened, there will be a business plan for its reopening. So it might be as put forward in the appendix, whichever it was that we have in front of us.
My only slight reservation, if I want to try and be helpful, is that a long way before that, I think I'd like to look at these costs and I'd want convincing. I mean, whilst we're in principle, it's like mother and apple pie. We all want the seminars to be done, but the concern is about this £10 million additional costs, which we all share.
I share it with you as well, Chair. But assuming that we complete, the likelihood tomorrow night is, to be fair, that Cabinet will say, yeah, go ahead, we'll spend an extra £10 million. That is likely tomorrow. Now,
do you wish to add to your motion? It's up to you whether...
No, I'm not adding that to the motion. I'm just saying that it's likely to happen tomorrow. And therefore, in another 18 months, whatever time it's going to take, we will have a completed Market Hall with 67 units and a nice open space and so on. And we will be on the trajectory to make this new operation viable within about 5 years. Because it's got start-up costs and to build up fill all the 87 units, 67 units and so on. Now, if we don't watch what is happening, if we don't ensure that we continue to promote and inspire people to visit the Market Hall, it will not be a success. So my point is to say that for the reopened Market Hall, i.e. when it is completed, we should have close and public monitoring of the business plan. We don't want to put it to one side and assume someone's going to look after it and it's going to be fine. I want us to watch what's going on and make sure it's a success. And that's Cabinet's responsibility.
Members probably understand this. Okay, thanks. Anybody else wish to speak? Rob.
Thank you, Chair. Just asking Mr Riley, I heard Councillor Martin say £35 million bottom line for the project. Did you say 35 million? Yeah. And you said 30. Could we just have some clarification on that number?
Can I have clarification of the cost, please, Simon?
Okay, so the report talks about approximately 15 million for phase one, which is on time, on budget. This report asks for 20 million, which includes 5 million of contingency, which is detailed in the financial section. So the lightly measured works at the moment is about £30 million, with a 5 million contingency in both client contingency and costed risk contingency. So my 30 million was excluding the contingency, but the report clearly states it's 35 million of financial approval we're seeking which includes contingency. Thank you.
So it's seeking £35 million worth of approval. Yeah, okay. Rob, yep.
So one of the lessons, painful lessons we learned from the A52 was about contingency within budgets for projects. In the A52 report, I recall well that it discussed that there's industry standards for the amount of contingency within cost of spend. Does the £5 million meet the industry standard for this kind of project?
Simon?
Thank you. Yes, if at this stage of REBA stage 2, and Steve could confirm, you could have contingencies up to 40% because of still what is to be established. I think what we have to recognise is that in this historic building, we've done a lot of work in the structure, maintenance and everything else in the phase 1, so we have lots of visibility. And actually, when we have a look at the supply chain and the estimates provided by Waits of the work to be done, they've confirmed about 80% of that in their design and with their subcontractors. On that basis, it was felt that 20% was a prudent amount of contingency, given, as Councillor Carr said, and I can detail more in the exempt appendix, that there are still some unknowns in respect of, for example, if we were to lift the floor or do some of the mechanical electrical, is there asbestos in there? Would we have to replace it with putting an amount in for asbestos? But there are still some uncertainties. So you can ask Steve as our Director of Property, but I think our conclusion is 20% is a sensible amount at this current stage of phase 2 to include for contingency, and we have put 1.8 million in respect to costed risk contingency, which is detailed in the exempt paper. So I think it's prudent and I think it's sensible. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. So like Councillor Martin, I love markets. I particularly love the market hall. I remember as a little lad going in there to get cherry lips with my sister. I used to get cola bottles, and then I graduated to beer bottles. The family used to go to the butchers, Mr. Anderson's, and then we went to Lewin's. They've moved over to Eagle Centre. So yeah, I absolutely love this building. In my view, it's an iconic building in Derby. It's stunning. Having all that scaffolding up for so long, we couldn't see the building for such a long time, and it's nice to be able to see the building again. So one of the things that someone spoke to me about recently was they made a comment to me about the Eagle Market that's now run by Derby on. And again, I like the Eagle Market. Yeah, I grew up with it. I remember that bridge from the old bus station over it. I can remember the pretty grim state of it at the time. Anyway, I digress. So the Eagle Centre for me again is a very interesting place. I like going. I get my shoes done there regularly when I do the heels. But 2/3 of it, maybe half, are empty or full, whichever way you want to see it, half glass, half full. I know it's operated by Derby on now, but the person who spoke to me about it was, can Derby sustain 2 indoor markets? I'm not an expert. I like going to them. Has that been considered with any of this project? Can Derby sustain 2 indoor markets? And the stall holders that were in the market hall moved over to Derby on. Has there been conversations with those stall holders? Will they go back to the market hall? Are they happy where they are? Have they got a better footfall being where they are now? And also, Mr. Riley, you suggested that we're bringing the market hall back into use. The market hall, from what I recall, was in use. It was shut to the refurbishment. So can you just explain what you mean by that, just for my understanding? That's it for now, Chair. I'm sure we'll come on to more things later on.
Yeah, I think we may be straying a little bit, but there are some connections. So if you very, very briefly can reassure Rob, if you're able to.
Yeah. First of all, we helped 12 traders go over to the Eagle Market for continuity of their business. As I think you'll appreciate, at the closing of the market, I think their from memory was either 18 or 19 stallholders. A number decided not to relocate, and that's due to a variety of reasons, including sometimes the age profile of the market holder owner. And that move was successful. Last Tuesday, when this paper was issued, or the Monday before it, we met with all the market traders to talk about these plans, so they're fully engaged, and part of the business plan is about creating the trader mix to allow them to come back into the market hall as required. But as you can see from the numbers, 12 traders and 67 units means that we actually have to grow a different market, as opposed to it's just replacing what is there previous. In respect of the future of the Eagle market, obviously the new owners of the Derby-on have to make a decision about the future use of that, both now in terms of the spare units and in terms of the future when we open this new destination, Derby Market Hall, or the reopened destination, because obviously it's not new, it's an icon of the city centre, and they will have to make decisions about their market. Hopefully we can sustain two markets, but they might have different offers and they might have different attraction. But we are in discussions with the Derby-on, as we were before relocation, and we will be right up to 2024. And we met Derby-on last week again to share with them the intention of this cabinet report. So, and finally, we also met and have been in contact with the creative industries and also maybe the occupiers and lock-up yard. So we've tried to consult all the relevant stakeholders as part of this and keep them informed as we go along, both now, in the past and in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Right, I'm going to ask Stephen to read Lucy's recommendation and then I'll put it to the vote. So, yes, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Do we have a seconder for that recommendation?
It was Mike.
Thank you, Chair. To recommend to Council Cabinet that it sets in place close and public monitoring of the business plan for the reopened Market Hall to maximise the likelihood of the reopening leading to a successful and profitable venture. So that's 2 in favour, none against, Chair. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. In December, Cabinet considered the draft council plan. This is a new council plan for 2022 to 25 and will sit alongside the medium-term financial plan for the same period. The draft plan was focused on working with the city, for the city, based on 4 key themes: green city, city of growth, vibrant city, resilient city. And we've done a lot of work engaging with partners around the development of those themes. So consultation activities have been completed over the last month and have included a public consultation through our Let's Talk Derby site, which is online with paper surveys. We've done councillor consultation, predominantly the exec scrutiny session that was held on 17th of January, covering both council plan and budget. We've done public consultation stakeholder sessions, so for example, Voices in Action and the community hubs. There's also been considerable stakeholder and partner consultation during that period, as well as with council colleagues. So in total, there were 108 responses to the public consultation. The green city was ranked as the most important priority theme, and resilient city, in terms of a safe city where those that need support can access them at the right time for them, was assessed as the most important outcome. We've given a summary of all of that feedback and the action taken as a result, which is shown in paragraph 4.8, supported by the information contained in Appendix 1. We have also made a number of changes to the draft plan, and those changes are highlighted in yellow, and that's shown in Appendix 3. We've also undertaken an equality impact assessment of the draft council plan, and that can be shown in Appendix 2. So there's a number number of recommendations shown at 2.1 onwards. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Heather. Any comments or observations at all? If not, I can thank you very much for that, Heather. We'll move on from there onto item 30, which is the medium-term financial plan. Simon, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Members will recall that Cabinet issued a budget for consultation on the 21st of December, and that was based on the provisional local government finance settlement. This final report is also, because of the date of issue, based on the provisional local government finance settlement. On the day of issuing this paper, we got the final local government finance settlement, which gave us a grand total of £8,000 more in respect of government funding. And I didn't feel it was necessary for that to amend the report and bring an amended report. And I will amend that subsequent to the council decision. Just to maybe help members and to navigate through some of the key aspects is that the schedules attached here are as went out to consultation. As Heather talked about, we had 108 responses, which on the new engagement tool, which is better than normal, and 2/3 were in agreement or neutral with the budget approach, and 60% agreed with the proposals or agreed with the proposals but had some concerns. So the majority felt that our medium-term financial plan, which obviously supports the council plan, was I'm going to say agreeable to them, but they recognise the context that we're setting the budget. In paragraphs 4.3.1 to 4.3.4, it talks about the changes that have happened since the budget that was issued for consultation in December. You can see, for example, there's been grant announcements in respect of a holiday activity and food programme, so that's shown as expenditure and funding, and we welcome that. Additional money for supporting families. We've put a new pressure, a new growth in for the Jubilee one-off budget to reflect the fact that it's the Queen's Platinum Jubilee this year, and to help the city respond to that. And then you can see there's a series of other small changes, but in the 259 million budget, really, there were minor changes between now and the budget, between then and the budget which we are now consulting on. The budget also updates the capital table, and it now includes the HRA capital programme that was approved by Cabinet in January, and also updates for any reprofiling and other funding that we have received. The recommendations of the capital element of the report talks about capital provisions in respect of 3 reports that are on the Cabinet agenda for tomorrow. The receipt of Our City, Our River, 17.7 million, which allows the completion of phase 2 of OCOR, which is extremely welcome. The Park Life project, which is the development of a football hub on the racecourse, and how much funding requirement, and the market hall additional funding requirement that we have just talked about. So overall, over the next 3 years, the city is intending, both for our own funding and external funding, to be spending over 400 million on assets within the city. The report details an update in the reserves position to reflect that, again, in a report that is later on the agenda, the projected overspend in this current financial year, 21-22, has now reduced down to 1.8 million, and we hope it will reduce further. So that's improved our reserves position, improving financial sustainability and resilience. So in the report, I just ask you to, probably just before I come on to some of the recommendations. It's already been mentioned tonight about cost of living, and there's in Appendix 20 there's details of the support that we provide to those people who may be suffering financial hardship, and I thought that was a useful addition to this report, just to highlight the support we give to people in financial hardship already, some of the new initiatives that have come forward, and funding, and again it's there for members' information. So when this goes to Cabinet tomorrow night, they'll be asked to consider the outcome of the consultation and scrutiny, and they'll be asked to consider that before recommending a budget, and they also need to be considering Appendix 7, which is my professional assessment of the budget, the level of reserves and robustness of estimates. My summary from that is also replicated in paragraph 11.12, and I have concluded that I feel that the Council can set a budget later this month, if they're so minded, with a budget requirement of just over 259 million, and the assumptions detailed in this report. So finally, Chair, there are a lot of recommendations here, but a lot of them are methodical to set the tone and set the recommendation to be considered by the whole Council on the 28th of February, and it is the Cabinet's responsibility in this report to recommend a budget to Council, which, if agreed on the 28th of February, will then set the Council tax requirement as required by that Council tax calculation, which for the purpose of this report is assumed to be a 1% social care precept and a 1.99% council increase. A survey of upper tier councils show the significant majority of councils are increasing their council tax similar to us at the maximum because of now the reliance on local authorities having to fund a lot of its activity from council tax. Hopefully I've interpreted the changes from the consultation budget report into this report and the navigation that this will then go to your full council meeting on 28th of December. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Simon. I think as Simon's pointed out, in less than 2 weeks, we're going to have a full meeting on the actual budget when these issues will be gone into in great detail. But I'll take comments and observations now. Alison.
Thank you, Chair. I have not a detailed but a general point to make before this goes to Cabinet, because I think it is concerning. I mean, the budget for children's services has been difficult for a number of years. We have had budget deficits to the tune of millions of pounds, and there are ongoing difficulties. And I know there are some valid and valuable actions in place to try and deal with some of those overspends, etc. But I do wonder if Simon could reflect on this a little bit for us for a minute, whether actually the children's services budget is adequate generally, given that the director of children's services recently told the BBC that she doesn't have enough money to properly look after the children, the looked after children in care in Derby. Thank you.
Simon.
Thank you, and I'm aware that Councillor Martin has had a full briefing from Andy Smith, the Strategic Director of Children's Services. But I think there's two dimensions we need to have here. We've reported clearly over the past 3 years a significant increase in the looked after children population from less than 500 in 2018 to over 600 in the last financial year. We have been, as a council, looking and reporting on a series of interventions that have been having a significant success in managing the number of children who come into our looked after children population, where we then have the obligation. So that could be the Educare programme, the Staying Put, the Step Down, the Independent Living initiatives that we have done. What we have seen is the success of those in limiting the number of children and reducing the number of children who are in our care system. So approximately 2 weeks ago, we were down at 630 looked after children. I think it was 627, compared to earlier in the year, there being, say, about 660. And for at least the past 2 to 3 months, there's been more children leaving the care system. That might be back into their family setting, it might be at the age of 18, than children entering the care system, which shows some of that success of the interventions of trying to do early help to prevent people to go in there. So our forecast of numbers, I think, is encouraging, and therefore this budget is it's set in the region of the 630 to 650 children that we might have, because there will be ebbs and flows in respect of that. The challenge that I think will remain for us is the cost of some of those care packages. And I think, again, both through Children and Young People Scrutiny and indeed here, we've talked about the sustainability of the care market. And that remains a challenge. So this budget does include a pressure reflecting not only the increase in costs that we've seen in this financial year, even though we've got lower numbers now, but also builds in for the following 2 years an increase in demographic and cost pressures for that sector. This is a national problem, Councillor Martin, as I think every councillor understands, that the sufficiency, the sustainability and the costs in care, external care secured, is significant. Based on the estimates that I saw, challenged and reviewed in creating this budget, I'm confident that for the activity levels that we are anticipating and that we've modelled, that this budget is set at a realistic level to manage the activity that we expect in next financial year. However, if we get secure placements remanded from the court, which are expensive, if we get a family group with lots of children coming in that have to come into our care, that cannot be an absolute promise. But I feel that the budget does provide sufficiently for what we are anticipating the demand will be for the following financial year. But I cannot give you an absolute promise. What I can give you is I've assessed the robustness of estimates on the activity that we are forecasting. Thank you, Chair.
I think the example that's given with regard to children is echoed in other pressures elsewhere, because we know it's, I'm not blaming you personally, Simon, but we know that our services are creaking at the seams. Need and demand are increasing, whilst resources are actually in real terms shrinking. And this is a problem that's facing every council up and down this country. And it's only after so many years can we look for efficiencies, look for doing things differently, indeed rationing, when we start to have to make some very difficult choices indeed. But it is simply, and we all know this is the elephant in the room, it is simply not sustainable. And at some stage, whoever is in power nationally has to recognise this and has to work with local authorities to make sure that we can deliver the decent services, irrespective of party politics, we all want and need for the people that we represent. Okay, if there's no more comments on this, or there are some more comments, I'll quickly take them because we're only halfway through the agenda. Lucy and then Hardiel. Lucy.
Thank you. We know that budgets everywhere are under pressure, particularly from the cost of energy, gas, electricity, fuel for driving a car as well, are all going up and up at the moment. And in some ways that's not, it's the direction we need to go, because as we move away from a fossil fuel-led society to something else, this is part of that move, potentially. But it's really uncomfortable at the moment because we are still too dependent globally on fossil fuels, and that, I think, is pushing the price up as people are leaving the coal behind. The gas is becoming more attractive for its carbon outputs, and that's pushing the price up. And that's hitting us. I don't know what the difference is in our costs, because there isn't a simple line in the paper which is saying this is our gas, our electricity bills. So, Chair, I think it would be a really useful piece of information. I don't expect our Strategic Director to have that information at his fingertips now, because I think it comes out of loads of different budget lines. But I think it would be something that we ought to be aware of well before the full council meeting, so that we can address that.
The director's indicating that he'll endeavour to let us that information. Thank you very much,
That would
Simon.
be really useful. And for me, it would be useful to know what the sort of top 10 budgets for fuel, for electricity, for gas are within that. There is, in the budget, though, we do have a line on, a capital line on energy, work to reduce energy. I can't think exactly what it's called here. I think I've lost it on my list. Let me go back one. Energy projects, it's called, I think. And it's about £500,000. And that's, there's nothing in the current year's spend, and then there's a total of £500,000 in the following 2 years. I think that's related to our buildings' energy. And the longer we postpone doing things to reduce our energy demand, the more money we have paid out for nothing except keeping warm or powering our lighting or our computers. So the sooner we can start addressing that, the sooner we start to benefit. And I think that is something that we actually should be looking at in more detail. And given that we put forward a recommendation about this, and it was mentioned from other consultees for this budget, I'm actually quite disappointed that something changes. One of the changes that we haven't got a change in our budget back to us this time that would have addressed that, because it has been raised before. Now, I have a question as well, Chair, which is we've probably all heard that the government intends giving £150 off everybody in a rated A to D council house off their A to D council tax band house in the coming year. I don't know how that's going to be paid for, and I would really like some reassurance that we actually have some details that that's not going to be coming off our budget.
Simon, can you help us with that £150, please?
Yes, thank you. I think all members will appreciate we learnt about it at the same time as the government announced it. They are calling it a council tax rebate. It's not a council tax rebate, so it's not going to be a credit on the council tax. We have to pay people for £150. We need to do checks about second homes, everything else. Logistically, and the report in December talked about the number of properties in band A to D, which is a majority of properties within Derby, is about 100,000 properties that we will have to do a complex set of payments out to grant this £150. It's the right thing in terms of people's financial positions, but it's an administrative and logistical challenge because we do not have BACS details or bank details for all of our people. That will be fully reimbursed by what is called a Section 31 payment, which is how the government reimburses us for policy decisions that they take. Like in previous years, it's say been freezing of the business rates or whatever. So it should have a neutral effect on us, and we should get something for the administration. But I think all members will appreciate that at the same time as annual billing, at the same time as we've done business grants, ARG, Omicron grants, etc., the burden on local authorities to pass this money out, and what could have been a easier administrative scheme, but not necessarily put money into people's pockets, that local authorities have got a big challenge in how that money goes out and people's expectation of the timeliness. I think the government said for those that we have BACS details, they would anticipate that would go out in April. For those that we haven't, we need to try and make sure that we are paying the right person at the right address and that we detect fraud wherever possible. So I'm just raising it not as a barrier but a consideration of trying to do the right thing for people of Derby and giving what the government has called a rebate. Thank you, Chair.
So it sounds like a logistical nightmare. Would that be reasonable?
Yes, I would say it's a logistical nightmare, and for low tax base authorities like Derby and most of the northern cities, the majority, and I think it's about 85% of our properties, if not more, are in band A to D. And I think it's about 100,000 payments we're going to have to make. Our bank will love us for that. So what we have is that those councils like us, mainly in the Midlands and the North, with low council tax properties, there's going to be a considerable amount of work and complexity in terms of getting this to the very people it needs to be got to. That puts a strain on already strained services, and as we've heard already, a logistical nightmare. Representations need to be made via Cabinet on this. And so I would like to make a recommendation to Cabinet that we express our concerns about the logistical nightmare that this council and many councils in the Midlands and North face in making sure that this £150 gets to the very people it needs to get to and puts an additional strain on services in this city and elsewhere in the Midlands and North. And we therefore call on Cabinet to write to Government to ask for additional resources to make sure this is done as swiftly and as effectively as possible. Hardy was seconding that. Could all those in favour please show?
I mean, I'd like to second that, but just to emphasise, I think it is really important, the logistical challenge and what resources are going to be taken, and is it going to mean that other parts of the service in the city council are going to be compromised? And how do we get early, and the resolution, Chair, I'm hoping will help the Cabinet to sort of focus on this. How quickly do we get the resources to actually make this happen? Because as Simon said, they found out at the same time we found out as a public announcement, and I'm sure the officers must be dreading and sort of how are they going to actually respond. And the quicker you know something about that, the better. But you need the resources to actually have, a bit like the COVID, have additional resources to help make this happen.
Absolutely. Okay, let's move to the vote on that, please. Those in favour, please show.
Chair,
Lucy, yes.
Yeah, because the Strategic Director did tell us that it was supposed to be cost neutral to us, and there was going to be a cost given to us for the admin side of this as well. But I think the point to pull out is what, in practice, this is going to hit in other ways. Is it going to have an impact on our ability to manage the housing benefit payments or other council tax payments, and so that we can be a bit more specific about the impacts it's going to have? Because if it's going to be cost neutral in terms of the admin, but we haven't got any more staff, there are going to be other repercussions.
Lucy, I've already picked that. We're putting the office in a very difficult position because these are political decisions. That's why I've made the recommendation I haven't. I think it's right and proper for us politicians to do that. It's obvious to anybody, the man in the street with his dog would realise that if you've got an additional resource like this, the complexity of it, even to us as lay people, as councillors, it's immense. And you look at the number of properties that we've got in those bands, it's immense. I don't believe for 1 minute our officers are sitting around doing nothing at all. They're going to be shifted elsewhere. And I'm not convinced, and I don't want to put the officers in a difficult position over this, I'm not convinced that the resources will be there to do it as swiftly and as efficiently as effectively as it needs to be done. I'm convinced of that, Lucy, and that's why, no, I'm sorry, no, I'm ruling that we are now going to make a vote on this. Unless there's anything, a specific and simple, straightforward question that you've got, Lucy.
I was just asking the officer that he says we're going to get the money back, and what you seem to be asking for is money back from the government, but we're already getting that back from what he said. But it's the implications, the knock-on effects of not having additional trained staff, what it's going to do to other parts of our service.
Okay, all right. I'll put the question they're asking, Simon, is do you think that the services will be stretched to make sure this is done rapidly and effectively in terms of identifying those that need to get this money in the timescale they ought to be getting it?
As I've said earlier, the timing and the pressure on the team will inevitably along with, say, pressure of getting court time and everything else, impact on our collection rate. And I think we have to appreciate that for people who pay by backs, we know who they are, we've got their details. But there's many people who change house, pay by cheque, have instalment plans, come in, or used to pay at the kiosk, etc. And for those, we have to make sure that we are paying the right people there. So yes, it's going to have an impact on performance, and the government will give us new burdens funding, but that comes after we've actually done the work. So, but such is life. We will do a professional job, as we did with business grants and everything else, in trying to manage it.
I understand the difficulty you've got, Simon. I'm not going to sort of put you in a more difficult position than we've already put you. So I'm putting my recommendation. This is politically now, because I can see the problems here. So those in favour, please demonstrate.
Can we just have the recommendation expressed again?
Yeah. That Cabinet... we start off by saying that executive scrutiny is extremely concerned at the proposals that are being put forward in terms of making sure that these are actually delivered in the time scale that need to be delivered to the people that need to get to. Therefore, we call the recommendations. We call upon Cabinet to write to the government to seek greater clarification on their intentions and ensure that there is adequate and the proper resourcing to do this in a timely manner to get the monies to the people that need to be got to within the time scale that we wish to see. And Stephen's nodded that he's captured that sentiment of that. So those in favour, please demonstrate. Those against, please demonstrate. I think that's passed.
Chair, 4 in favour, 0 against. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much. Right, moving on now to the next item on the agenda.
Chair.
Sorry, Hardil.
I had a question on the budget. Yeah. Simon, in my area of responsibility, there's 2 big ticket items for savings in the budget. One's on public protection of street pride, where £800,000 worth of savings are being put against to balance the budget, and it's on 3 areas: commercial, procurement, income generation, but it's very general in terms of how the funding is going to be. It's a quite large sum. What confidence is there that that will be actually delivered on that particular initiative, particularly when the income generation, particularly from enforcement, over the last couple of years has been not reaching the target set previously? And then the second one is around bereavement services, where over 3 years, I think there are savings of something like £700,000 being identified, which are written as saying will improve crematorium provision, have enabled realistic targets to be set. I'm not so sure, because and it does say that the wholesale review of our bereavement services will not be done in this period, which is needed, because we are running behind other crematoria in terms of income and bookings, as far as I understand. And here we're looking to get savings whilst not actually doing the wholesale review and investment that's needed to bring our crematorium into the modern world and compete more effectively. So I don't know if you are able to comment on that. I know these are operational targets set, but they both seem challenging, and will they be delivered to balance the budget?
Simon, are you able to help?
Thank you, Councillor Dinser. Obviously, we had the budget scrutiny in January, and therefore haven't brought all the papers attached to each of the savings. So I can undertake to get a response on the 2 questions raised. We do have as part of a Working Smarter programme, a commercialisation of looking at how we deliver services, understand activity, is there opportunity to trade or get additional income in, and that is part of it. But as you quite rightly said, it doesn't make up the explanation for the full 800,000 there, but I'll get you the detail. I think in respect to bereavement services, you're quite right that we're seeing a balancing in the area between private crematoria and ourselves. We did invest at the beginning of the COVID pandemic into another cremator up at Markeaton to because of the age of some of the equipment, but we're also looking at the future provision in terms of our crematorium service, in terms of the investment required to bring it forward to be modern, and I suppose also to, in this competitive private-public provision, to be attractive to the people who need to choose at that appropriate point where they wish their relatives or whatever to be cremated at that point in time. But I'll get you detailed answers on both of those, and hopefully on bereavement services, it's a realistic target with some of what I've just said, but we need to look a number of years in the future about having a modern, fit-for-purpose bereavement service, crematorium, and wraparound service around it. Thank you.
Moving on to item 14, Treasury Management and Investment Strategy.
Okay, I'm assuming that you've all read it and understood it.
Yep.
So the Treasury Management Strategy basically sets out the parameters that we can operate in terms of our borrowing and our investments. And you'll understand investments, it's about security of the investments, it's about return on the or liquidity against the investment and return on the investment. And it's important that when we're investing, we've got to set around it follows those principles, and a lot of the report talks about. Sorry, I didn't have my microphone on. I'll start again if that's okay, Chair, because I didn't have my microphone on, so anyone watching. Okay, so the Treasury Management Report sets down our parameters for borrowing and investments. For investments, it's about getting the right mix between security of investment, return on the investment, and liquidity of the investment. And we set down the parameters that, as a council, you allow myself and my staff to operate in. For probably the past 10 years, we've been net investors. So you can see there that during the course of this year, we've often had balances between 60 and about 110 million pounds at any point in time that we need to place securely in line with those principles. The report also sets down a number of indicators that we will work within, and it gives you some quite interesting information around our capital financing requirements and the level of borrowing that we have. Capital financing requirement being permission to have funded the capital programme over a number of years, vis-a-vis the amount that we have borrowed and the split between us and the HRA in respect of the debt. So you can see there that we are under borrowed, so we have not had to go out and seek more expensive borrowing, and we've used internal investments to offset that, and that's been the case since 2008. That benefits the revenue budget by not incurring debt charges before we need to. The report also talks about areas such as like the share of our budget that is used to service debt charges, and it also sets down some of the economic context. This is quite a technical report, but it is a very important report that Cabinet will recommend to Council, and Council then need to adopt, because safeguarding the public money is vitally important, and we want to be responsible, prudent in our application of both borrowing and investments. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Simon. Okay, if there's no questions on that, this is a technical report. We'll move on to item 15, the draft 2021-22 Q3 financial monitoring. Simon again.
Okay, I will just call that report up. So thank you for this. This is our regular report. I'm pleased to announce that we're carrying on our trajectory of a reduced overspend in this financial year, which the report details is primarily been experienced in that Q1 position in respect of children in care. That has reduced since then. At the end of Q3, we were forecasting a call on reserves in respect of the overspend of £1.8 million. Forecasts that have been produced since the end of December would indicate that is reducing, and I have a reasonable expectation that we'll be able to deliver our spend within budget by the end of the financial year, which is pleasing because it means we don't have to draw down on reserves, and by implication, though it's not that significant, it means that our financial resilience and sustainability increases for the future, and that was linked to the reserve strategy that Cabinet approved in December. The report details a capital budget of 66 million against with a forecast of 141 million, and therefore there's a number of schemes that will need to deliver spend in the final quarter. But in this final quarter, for example, Moorways is going to be finished on time and on budget, and again the report highlights that. In respect of the dedicated schools grant, and this is where maybe I should have made the link into the budget reports, we are seeing, like most of the country, an increase in demand in respect of high needs block, which is about support for children with special educational needs. This is a mixture of sort of an increase in ECHPs, education healthcare plans, and also where these children are being educated. So, for example, the number of special school placements, both within the city and out of the city. And that is a concern nationally, following the SEN reforms of 2014, that there is insufficient money being put into SEN services to meet the needs. And if you read the local government press, a lot of councils are forecasting very significant DSG deficits in respect of that. This is likely to take us into a DSG deficit position for the first time. Again, in the previous report, it talked about the DSG reserves or the DSG balance there, so I draw that to your attention. It details a collection fund, which our main issue of a collection fund this year is, again, availability of court time to chase debt and to issue summonses and everything else. And the report also details the application of the sort of COVID monies that we've got, both those which we had at the beginning of the year, those that we had provided for in the budget that you agreed last February, but also the significant amount of money that we received in year for things like infection control, workforce pressures, and everything else. So overall, how I'd summarise this is that it's an improving position, which sort of is pleasing and pays testament to everyone's contribution, both our colleagues but also members, in focusing on trying to make sure that we can deliver a balanced budget. But there are challenges inherent in some of the demand pressures we're facing, and that was raised in the last report, around that we have to constantly keep vigilant and do both medium-term financial planning and also, where necessary, in-year responses to the budget pressures being faced by local government and in Derby. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Simon. Lucy?
Chair, this might be another of these technical reports, but I actually find this one's got quite a lot of interest in it. I just want to pull out two things. Firstly, the comments about the looked after children and the way in which that budget is improving. And I feel that it's somewhere where I would like to pass back our thanks to all the people working in those teams in their disparate ways to be able to make a difference on that, because I think it's showing now that that hard work is paying off. The particular area I think that I would like to highlight back to them is the need for more foster carers. And I think the challenge that some people are now having in terms of their household finances, I feel that the opportunity is there to point out that if they were to take an extra young person into their household, there may be opportunities to be able to make their budget balance better because of the funding that goes with support for our foster children. And I don't know whether there's a way in which we can renew some publicity about foster caring for the city and for the city's children as something which might be pertinent to highlight at the moment. I have a question though, which is more specifically on the capital budget. It just seems really opportune. This is just in the summary 1.1b. It just seems really optimistic to say that after 3 quarters of the year we've spent 66 million, and somehow in the last quarter we're going to spend nearly 80 million. Do we really think we're going to be doing that, or is there going to be quite a lot of carryover?
Okay, let's start, Simon.
That?
Thank you.
Maybe if I can just answer the question on fostering just as context. So we have and we continue to very actively promote fostering. We're seeing at the moment an increase in the independent foster carers coming to work with Derby, along with a social impact bond approach with fostering, which is really positive. We're also seeing now, obviously with more court time, guardianship, special guardianship orders and adoptions going up, which helps us. And we're also getting support from right across the city. So, for example, I was in a demand management board this afternoon, and the Derbian has offered their community lounge opposite Iceland for us to maybe actually hold fostering events in to increase awareness and everything else. So you can see that it doesn't take much, 10 here, 5 there, a number of guardianship orders, a number of adoptions to suddenly make that strengths-based approach of the community that I think Councillor Kerr was talking about. We will constantly be promoting this. I know you mentioned when Rolls-Royce was reducing some of their staff previously about had we gone in and made aware that fostering is an option for people who maybe have made a life choice or changing their career direction in respect to that, and we will continue to do that. But all the trends would indicate that our fostering promotion initiatives and everything else is bearing fruit. So just as a couple of examples on that. I think Councillor Kerr raises the very valid question over, do we have optimum bias in our capital forecasting? I think, if I got to be honest, there is still an optimum bias of the profile is too optimistic. But having said that, if we look at a number of the schemes which are forecast to have spend in this quarter, such as like the completion of moorways and everything else, we will have a fair proportion of significant capital expenditure going out. Ask me, would I say that we will definitely spend 141 million? I think that's probably got optimum bias in and is optimistic. Do I think we'll spend 110 million plus? Yes. But we do need to get better as an authority in terms of profiling of expenditure, especially where it's external funding, and because ultimately the capital programme is a promise to the city, if you want to call it, that we hope to deliver that change in the asset at that particular point in time. So, yes, I think it's probably got some bias, optimum bias in it, Councillor Kerr.
Right, thank you very much. Okay, if there are no more questions on item 15, item 16, compliance with contract and financial procedures rules. Is it you again, Simon?
Yes, I should have brought a glass of water in, but
yes,
I think I'll survive this one.
Okay.
So this is your normal report, and I think it's got a series of items in which are very positive to the city. So if I can just maybe pick up those where it's about, in a sense, the council using funding to support the city or its ambitions. So you'll see there's an item here about home care retention funding. This is about managing and supporting the workforce in the care sector, where we both got government grant and money from CCG in order to incentivise frontline workers to remain employed over a winter period when demand is expected to increase. So obviously this has been both a Joined Up Care Derbyshire priority and also government priority, and you can see there that in total it's quite a significant amount that will go to that sector. We are aware of current high levels of vacancies, both in the independent sector and within the council, and we hope that this will help us in respect of retaining these people at this important time to support the most vulnerable in our communities. Another thing positive here is to ask you to accept the grant funding of 17.7 million in respect of Environment Agency funding that helps us to deliver Ochor Phase 2, which is obviously from the silt mill down the river. That is a huge commitment from the Environment Agency, and I think you remember. I think you'll remember that Ochor has always been just nearly 100 million project, of which 60 million had been spent to date in respect of upriver, Chester Green, the protecting houses, and now it allows us to progress Phase 2 down towards Bassrec and everything else. And I think this is, we should thank the Environment Agency for contributing for it. I mentioned briefly the proposal in respect of a Derby football hub. This is on the racecourse and is effectively securing funding, 60% funding from the football foundations, and sort of matched funding from the council, and I reference that in the budget report. So some really positive, if you want to call it, passporting or ability to get funding to help with the council's objectives. There's a couple of items on here, Normanton Cemetery Lodge, to declare that surplus to the council requirements, and also on the Madeley Centre to agree the direction of travel regarding the future use of the Madeley Centre. And if you've got detailed questions about Steve Kaplan's here, and we'll be able to help answer some of those. Apart from that, I think the report details the background to each of those areas I've mentioned, and the report asks you to approve the items in the finance and contract procedure rules. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Okay. If there are no comments at all, thank you very much for that report. Moving on to item 7.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Heather.
So this report sits alongside the report that we saw on financial monitoring for Q3, so from September to December 2021. This report presents a consolidated overview of performance in line with the commitments made in the recovery plan, and brings together information and progress on priority performance measures, projects, and also strategic risks. So an overview of highlights is shown at paragraph 4.5. There is also a comprehensive overview shown in Appendix 1. So of the measures where quarterly targets have been set, 59% had met or exceeded these at the end of December. In terms of the Q3 outturns, 64% of measures are forecasted to achieve their annual targets by the end of March. 86% of priority milestones and actions were assessed as on track or completed, and 78% of priority projects being monitored as part of the recovery plan were evaluated as either green or amber green at the end of December. There are 18 strategic risks on the strategic risk register, and since the end of September 2021, one risk has been escalated, and that's the risk regarding industrial action, with one risk being de-escalated. Very, I was going to say, very plain English, de-escalated, non-compliant condition of council properties. So, key achievements to note, because in actual fact, I think despite the ongoing difficulties caused by the pandemic, the council has continued to deliver in priority areas. As you can see, shown against our priorities of our place, our people, our council. So I guess key highlights that I would bring out is in terms of our place, we have actually facilitated the creation of over 190 jobs for local people, and we have also improved performance against our NEET population, so those young people who are not in employment, education or training. In terms of our people, as we saw on the financial report, there has been a reduction in the numbers of children in care and the use of independent fostering agencies through more creative use of our own carers. And also we saw a positive special educational needs and disabilities revisit outcome from Ofsted, where positive progress had been made against all areas. Finally, in terms of our council, we have obviously developed the proposals for the new council plan and medium-term financial plan, and implemented a new project management platform and strengthened our tools that support around programme management. So we've also completed 3 risk reviews in the last quarter, and they are identified in the report. There are, of course, areas for development which we have highlighted, and we have obviously undertaken a number of actions to mitigate those. We also have further review activities planned in Q4 in terms of both performance and risk, just to try and make sure we are addressing any areas of development. So in terms of recommendations, we're asking Cabinet and Scrutiny to note the latest performance results, to consider in particular the activities that have been undertaken over the last quarter, and also to note that no performance measures are recommended for consideration via a performance surgery at this time. I'm happy to take any questions on that.
Thank you very much, Heather. Lucy.
Thank you. And I have a question on page 5 of the appendix. Towards at the bottom section is about deliver initiatives to support people into employment. And it may be the way I'm reading the words and I'm failing to understand correctly. The 4th bullet point down under recruitment says, develop 14 training into employment programs for entry-level jobs that 10 individuals completed, with 47 people gaining a skill and 55% securing employment. So 10 people completed it, but 47 got a skill. So maybe they didn't complete the course, but only just over half of them have secured employment. It just seems a slightly strange set of statistics. And I have a second question, which is I'm pleased we've got a reference here to Project Assemble, but it does leave me wondering what's actually happening on it, because the project, the options report has been completed and was considered by the project board in January 2022, but I'm not aware of that having any public visibility, and it would be interesting to see it.
Okay, thank you. Heather, can you help there?
On the first point, I suspect there may be a missing and, but we will check that just in terms of the 10 people and the 47 people who've gained skills. I'll come back to Lucy on that. I'm sorry, in terms of the second question, I didn't quite catch it. Sorry, could you repeat
that, please, Lucy? Okay. Heather, were you able to get that?
I think we'll come back, because obviously that includes a variety of information, both technical and sort of plans, and Steve Kaplan, the Director of Property, will just drop a note of what information was considered at that project board in January 2022.
That makes sense. Thank you so